After 11 years on death row, Paul Warner Powell was executed by electric chair at the Greensville Correctional Center on March 18, 2010. In this video, we will explore every detail of this shocking case, from the night of the horrific crime to the last meal and final words in the execution chamber. Due to the serious nature of the case, viewer discretion is advised. All descriptions are based on facts and are presented carefully and in detail. On a cold winter afternoon, January 29, 1999, in the town of Manassas, Virginia, a tragedy struck the Reed family. When Robert Culver, the stepfather of Stacey and Christy Reed, returned home around 4:15 p.m., a horrific scene awaited him. Entering the familiar house, Mr. Culver quickly noticed something was wrong. An eerie silence filled the air. He discovered the body of his 16-year-old stepdaughter, Stacey Reed, lying motionless. The father's heart seemed to stop at the sight of his child. Shocked and panicked, he rushed to find a phone to call the police, but the phone was not in its usual place. While searching for the phone, Mr. Culver continued to check the house and made an even more horrifying discovery. 14-year-old Christy Reed was dying in the basement, lying in a pool of blood. She had severe injuries to her neck, abdomen, and wrists, with terrible stab and slash wounds. The scene was a chaotic, haunting image of blood and despair. Immediately, police and medical personnel were dispatched to the scene. Investigators were faced with a bloody and mysterious crime scene. Stacey's body showed fatal wounds, while Christy, though still alive, was in critical condition and needed immediate medical attention. These first few hours were a race against time to save Christy's life and find any clues about the perpetrator. Stacey Reed, 16, and Christy Reed, 14, were two sisters living in Manassas, Virginia. Like many teenagers their age, they lived normal lives, going to school and spending time with friends. Stacey was a vibrant young woman in the prime of her life, with her own dreams and ambitions. Christy was her younger sister, also on the path to adulthood. At the time of the crime, Stacey was in a romantic relationship with a black boyfriend. For Stacey, this was likely just a typical teenage romance. However, it became an indirect cause of the horrific tragedy. Both sisters were completely unaware that a terrible threat was lurking, and the truth about Stacey's relationship had triggered the killer's violent instincts. There were no particular signs of impending danger in Stacey and Christy's lives. They were completely innocent victims, brutally attacked by someone filled with deep-seated hatred. Christy, though lucky to survive the brutal assault, would bear permanent scars on her neck, living proof of the nightmare she endured. These scars are not just physical wounds but also a testament to the helplessness and pain that victims of hate-fueled violence must bear. Paul Warner Powell, born on April 13, 1978, was a 20-year-old man at the time of the crime. For a long time, Powell had openly declared himself a white supremacist and a racist. This extremist view was not just a personal belief, but also shaped how he saw and interacted with the world, especially with people of other races. Powell was an acquaintance of Stacey Reed. This made the crime even colder and more terrifying, as the perpetrator was not a complete stranger, but someone the victim might have once trusted. Powell's hatred for interracial relationships was a key factor, a trigger for his violent actions. Although detailed information about Powell's family history or childhood psychological trauma is not available, his belief in white supremacy indicates the formation of an extremist and dangerous ideology. He not only opposed but also deeply hated relationships between white and black people. This explains, but does not justify, the brutal motive behind his crime. Before the crime, there was no specific information about Powell's criminal record. However, his later behavior, especially his contempt for the law and his bragging about the crime, revealed an arrogant personality with no remorse and a complete lack of awareness of the severity of his actions. This was a man obsessed with a racist ideology, ready to commit horrific crimes to satisfy his blind hatred. On January 29, 1999, Paul Warner Powell went to Stacey Reed's home. When he learned that Stacey had a black boyfriend, Powell's racial hatred erupted. He attempted to rape Stacey. Stacey resisted fiercely, refusing to submit to Powell's brutal assault. In a fit of rage at being thwarted, Powell stabbed Stacey in the chest with a knife, piercing her heart. Stacey Reed, 16, died at the scene. After killing Stacey, instead of fleeing or showing remorse, Powell did something chillingly cold. He calmly drank iced tea and smoked a cigarette, waiting for Christy, Stacey's sister, to come home from school. When 14-year-old Stacey Reed arrived home, Powell ordered her down to the basement. There, he raped her. While he was committing the crime, there was a knock at the front door. Powell got dressed, tied Christy up, and went outside to check. In that brief period, Christy tried to untie herself and escape or hide, but was unsuccessful. When Powell returned to the basement, he took off Christy's glasses and strangled her until she was unconscious. Not stopping there, he stabbed her in the abdomen with a knife, the blade missing her aorta by a mere centimeter. He then proceeded to slash her neck multiple times, wounds that would later require 61 stitches. Christy also had numerous stab wounds on her neck, abdomen, and both wrists. Thanks to Christy's bravery and will to survive, along with the timely discovery by her stepfather, Robert Culver, she was fortunate to survive. Christy later became a key witness, helping to bring justice. The scars on her neck are a permanent testament to that horrific night. Immediately after Robert Culver discovered Stacey was dead and Christy was severely injured, he called the police. Law enforcement quickly arrived at the scene. With Christy alive and able to provide a statement, the police quickly identified Paul Warner Powell as the main suspect. The investigation proceeded urgently. Based on Christy's initial testimony, police collected evidence from the scene, including the murder weapon and related traces. Although Christy was very seriously injured, the information she provided was crucial in directing the investigation. It did not take long for Paul Warner Powell to be arrested. When interrogated, Powell may have initially tried to conceal some details, but the collected evidence and Christy's testimony were enough to charge him. The arrest went relatively smoothly, showcasing the investigators' swiftness in apprehending the perpetrator. With clear evidence and the testimony of a surviving victim, Powell was quickly prosecuted. Paul Warner Powell was charged with capital murder and sentenced to death in his first trial. However, this verdict was overturned by the Virginia Supreme Court when Powell appealed. The court ruled that there was insufficient evidence to prove that Powell had attempted to rape Stacey, and there were no other aggravating factors to justify the death penalty for Stacey's murder. The rape of Christy could not be used as a basis to turn Stacey's murder into a capital offense. The conviction for the rape of Stacey Reed was upheld, and Powell was sentenced to 3 life sentences, with the possibility of parole in 2038 at the age of 60. In an act of arrogance and recklessness, Powell believed he had escaped the death penalty due to the principle of double jeopardy. Under this mistaken belief, he wrote a letter full of insulting language to the prosecutor and other taunting or threatening letters to the victim's family. In the letter to the prosecutor, Powell proudly admitted to the details of his attempt to rape Stacey and bragged about his crime. He described how he told Stacey she could do it the easy way or the hard way, and how she resisted, after which he stabbed her and stomped on her neck until she stopped breathing. He also wrote, "I guess I forgot to mention these events during questioning. Haha. Do you hate yourself for being so stupid and for saving me?" In reality, the principle of double jeopardy did not apply in this case because, although his initial death sentence had been overturned, he had not been acquitted and was still eligible to be retried. Using the very letter Powell had written, prosecutors charged him again with the attempted rape and murder of Stacey Reed. In the second trial, Powell was once again convicted and received the death penalty. His letter became the ironclad evidence against him, putting him back on the path to face the ultimate justice. After being sentenced to death a second time, Paul Warner Powell went through the appeals process, but all were unsuccessful. The execution date was set for March 18, 2010. Powell was given the choice of execution method between lethal injection and the electric chair, and he chose the electric chair. In his final hours, there is no detailed information about Powell's last meal. However, according to some unofficial sources, he had a hamburger, a can of Coca-Cola, and a chocolate bar. A day before his execution, Powell spoke on the phone with the family of Stacey and Stacey Reed. During that call, he admitted his crime was a senseless and pointless act and expressed remorse. On the morning of March 18, 2010, Paul Warner Powell was taken to the execution chamber at the Greensville Correctional Center. When asked if he had any last words, he remained silent and just stared at the ceiling. That silence could have been a sign of accepting his fate, or simply a final emptiness. At 9:00 p.m., the death sentence was carried out. With Powell's passing, justice was served for Stacey and Stacey Reed, as well as their family. His death cannot erase the pain he caused, but it is an affirmation that heinous crimes, especially those stemming from blind hatred, will be paid for. Stacey Reed, the survivor of the brutal attack, has gone through a long process of recovery, both physically and mentally. The scars on her neck are a permanent testament to Powell's crime. But she bravely faced it and stood as a witness, playing a crucial role in bringing the perpetrator to justice. Stacey's resilience is an inspiration and a reminder of the strength of the human spirit. The case of Paul Warner Powell is a tragic story about the devastation of racial hatred. It shows how extremist ideologies can lead to unforgivable acts of violence. The lesson learned from this case is the necessity of confronting and fighting against racism, while protecting the vulnerable from those who carry such hatred within them. This story also highlights the importance of the legal system in ensuring justice, even when facing the most defiant criminals. Powell's arrogance, in believing he had escaped his fate, was ultimately what led him to the death penalty. This is a powerful message that no one is above the law, and that justice will always find its way.